Hello Horror Hounds, welcome back to our look through the films of David Cronenberg, at least his early and mid-period films. Please forgive my more nasal than usual voice, but I've been bunged up with a cold for the last week or so, which is perhaps appropriate because the throbbing inside my skull for the last few days has made me feel like I myself am being scanned, because the next film to look at is 1981's head-popping Scanners. Whatever you think of Scanners, and personally I'm a little ambivalent about it, there's no question that it was David Cronenberg's first bona fide hit. Scanners, for the uninitiated, are people with unusual telepathic and telekinetic abilities. They can get inside your mind and make you do things and see things. They can affect the world around you, and when you put two scanners head to head against one another, well, the results are explosive and very marketable. As with a lot of early Cronenberg, there's a company, a facility, completely untrustworthy. Here it's called Consec. They make weaponry, security systems, and Dr. Ruth, a high-ranking member of Consec, after they bought out his company, is seeking out these scanners with a view to research and development. You have naturally a renegade scanner, Daryl Revock, played by Michael Ironside, who's attempting to bring down the system, bring down any and all systems. And another scanner, one off the radar that Dr. Ruth finds, Cameron Vale, who he sets up as a kind of Trojan horse to infiltrate Revock's underground scanner renegade movement and bring them down, and perhaps even spearhead the next generation of scanner development. All of this comfortably within Cronenberg's wheelhouse of mutation, evolution, untrustworthy organizations and systems of power that seek to control the burst of biology and mutation and all the messy stuff, to try and make the messy stuff nice and neat, packageable and sellable, and the messy stuff, well, it gets really messy. From Cronenberg's own mouth, this was the most frustrating film he'd ever made. Rushed into production, shooting had to begin without a completed script and had to wrap within 2 months so that the financing could qualify as a tax write-off. This is the end of Cronenberg's tax shelter years, forcing the director to write and shoot at the same time, which is, I'm sure, it was something that he was deeply, deeply uncomfortable with. This might explain some of the film's shortcomings. Don't get me wrong, I do like Scanners. Scanners was my introduction to the world of David Cronenberg. But one thing watching these films in order lays bare is the fact that until now the director was improving, significantly improving, with each successive film, right up to Scanners, which seems like a bit of a retrograde step. I suppose your feelings about Scanners are going to depend on what you personally want from David Cronenberg movies. Ideas versus stories. The man is an ideas factory, but sometimes he fails to hit the sweet spot between those ideas and wrapping them in a satisfying story with satisfying characters. And I think the rush into production here has disbalanced that. I think he's yet to hit the ultimate sweet spot. That is to come. It's certainly not here in Scanners. A lot of the characters are certainly don't feel as fully realized as in even previous films of his. They seem more like pieces on a board that get things done so that we can get to the shady corporations and the underground movements and the renegades. It's something he'd returned to, those themes, much more successfully, I'd argue, in Videodrome and Existence. And it even manages to creep its way, themes like that, into the margins of something like Cosmopolis and his superb novel, Consumed. We have a solid first half, which leads me to suspect that that portion of the script had been massaged into some kind of shape before the funding had been achieved, and The rest was perhaps a rush to the end, which is why it gets a little bit scrappy. But certainly for that first half, you've got a fantastic sort of throwback vibe to 70s espionage type thrillers. Certainly the film sets itself up as more of a mystery rather than a wham bam actioner, which is something that will get rebalanced when the sequels come. There's certainly ideas at play here. It's almost impossible to watch Scanners and not see at least part of it as an allegory of the thalidomide scandal. During the 50s, pregnant women were prescribed thalidomide, marketed as a relief for morning sickness, which sadly gave rise to children suffering from all sorts of horrible birth defects and deformities. The Scanners are certainly an allegory of that, and I think with time for more development of the script, which wasn't there, I think we would have had possibly the most interesting and thoughtful David Cronenberg movie to date. Instead, what we got is what everyone remembers it for. It's the one where the guy's head explodes. We also get what has become, to this point, another staple of David Cronenberg's filmography, yet another bland male lead. Cameron Vale is played by Stephen Lack, and I suspect this is a case of nominative determinism because he certainly lacks charisma. What exactly is it about Cronenberg that this keeps happening? Certainly, whilst his films are being made in the tax shelter years, money restrictions were placed on him regarding casting. He could only have two non-Canadian actors in roles, and the second only if they were paid less than the leading Canadian actor. You'd have to surmise that if that was the root cause, Canada has a dearth of charismatic actors, and that is clearly nonsense. This is the country that gifted us Ryan Reynolds and William Shatner. I'm not being ironic. I genuinely think both of those two are superb actors. Anyone who wants to argue with me about Shatner's acting ability, I'll see you for a fight in the comments section. I'll win. What Cronenberg clearly got better and better at was surrounding his wooden, let's say, male leads with effervescent supporting casts who really popped. Let's talk about the villain. Let's talk about Daryl Revock, Michael Ironside. I was first introduced to the work of Michael Ironside when he was playing Ham in the TV miniseries of V. The goody with shades of bad, who was instantly cooler, much more interesting than Mark Singer's chisel-jawed, more straightforward, all-American Donovan. Don't get me wrong, I like Mark Singer, I like Donovan, I love V, but Ham was where it was at for me. Since then, Michael Ironside has chewed scenery across the decades, either as out-and-out baddies or good guys with an edge. He stole Total Recall and Starship Troopers. He's in Free Willy, which I haven't seen, but I can only assume he's a baddie in that, and would like to believe that he eats the whale. Ironside runs away with Scanners. When he's on screen, the movie comes alive. It's almost like his character's scanning ability suddenly crackles throughout the entire film. A clenched jaw muscle, a raised eyebrow, a look. He can do so much with so little, and he's given, trust me, meaty dialogue to roll around with as well. One of the most outstanding moments in the film that's not to do with heads like overripe cantaloupes is an old reel-to-reel footage of him in his 20s when he was being studied in an institution for what they thought was his mania, that they didn't understand his scanning abilities. And he's very close in this, I think, to Jack Nicholson in The Shining, and a little bit of Jack Nicholson's Joker as well in there. He's going toe-to-toe with that level of cinematic villainy, absolutely, unflinchingly, and completely successfully. On the other side of the net, you've got Patrick McGoohan as Dr. Ruth, that ubiquitous absentee father or creator figure that we've talked about in previous reviews of David Cronenberg's earlier works. I adore Patrick McGoohan. He is the creator, writer, sometime director, star of The Prisoner, the 60s TV series that in my humble opinion is the greatest TV series of all time. McGoohan is he's more like, if Michael Ironside is the young, hungry lion, he's the old lion, the old leader of the pride, uh, leaning back, keeping things internal. But again, he can do things with a line of dialogue. He can take it places, strange inflections, and the like, uh, that make him an absolutely magnetic screen presence. He completely commands your attention, beg your pardon, for the first half of the movie. There's a scene towards the end where he has to have a breakdown and does a lot of internal monologuing, which I take to be public enemy number one of the sign that the script was being cobbled together. He's being asked to take the script, the story from here, so we need to get it to here. And Patrick, you have to do all of it with the camera on you, with you not talking, and we'll loop some dialogue in for your thoughts over the top of it. Okay, so no pressure. He does the apps. I mean, he does phenomenally with it, but it's an enormous ask, and that's where things perhaps start going a little bit frayed around the edges and a little bit loopy. Howard Shore's back for scoring the movie, and boy does Cronenberg need him. He really steps up here, probably sensing that the visuals of characters just sort of staring intensely at one another, despite all of the makeup and that, perhaps needs something else to convince the viewers that psychic warfare is actually going on, and that is what he brings to the table. Uh, all manner of weird, distorted noises and electronica, and also his strings as well. Howard Shore's lush strings, which always gives a sense of sort of grandeur, some sort of Shakespearean tragedy unfolding, regardless of how low budget the product is, or how completely lifeless Stephen Lack might be in the lead. Howard Shore can somehow convince you something important is happening. You need to pay attention. Okay, let's talk about the exploding head. For all the things that could have been and might have been with Scanners, for all its rough around the edges nature because of its rushed production, there was a synergy, a moment in time, and it absolutely filled it. This moment in the film is exactly what the pause and frame advance button on your VHS remote control was designed for. Well, that and boob shots, but let's talk about the exploding head. Can you imagine seeing that scene for the first time in a cinema without being able to go, hang on, what the fuck was that? And just rewinding it and watching it again and on a loop. Makeup artist Dick Smith, who worked on The Exorcist, provided prosthetics for the scanner jewels and the iconic head exploding effect. And it was, I read, originally released with that scene at the very beginning of the film, but Cronenberg re-edited it, pushing the scene back a reel because people were so overwhelmed by that opening that by the time they got back into the film, it had completely lost them, which was weird because I put the disc on to my girlfriend, intending to show her exactly that scene, thinking it was right at the start of the film. Just before we go to bed, I just want to show you this because this is the next film we're going to see. And I see Cameron Vale in a mall giving someone a seizure and stealing French fries, thinking, this isn't the start of Scanners. But it is. You have to wait for your gravy, but you don't have to wait too long. For all its shortcomings, Scanners draws from inspirations and has its own legacy. It perhaps takes some of its inspiration from the notion of senders that William Burroughs puts into Naked Lunch, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if Cronenberg have just been mulling over Naked Lunch and the work of Burroughs for a long time before finally attending to it specifically in the film of Naked Lunch. But certainly Scanners takes its cue from comic books as well, and perhaps Brian De Palma's The Fury, another sort of psychic horror movie. There's, as I said, the 70s political movies of paranoia and car chases and espionage and gunfights. But taking mutations and ostensibly superpowers and dealing with them straight down the line as real physical kitchen sink superpowers, if you will. Grounded superpowers certainly lays the foundations for M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable and the strangely unexpected franchise that's turned into. Bryan Singer's X2 features talk of a character drilling a hole in their head to let out the things inside, which is certainly a callback to Daryl Reevok in Scanners. I'm even reminded of early scenes in Zack Snyder's Man of Steel before that completely falls apart, where a young Clark freaks out at school because he can't modulate his super hearing and his X-ray vision. And it also includes some of the small screen recent outings of Marvel's stable, Daredevils, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage's, and perhaps the forthcoming Runaways, which seems to be dealing with superpowers in a horror vein. These are grounded realistic powers that come with realistic problems. And I think an awful lot of them can trace their lineage back, for good or ill, to Scanners. Cronenberg's tax shelter filmmaking years end with Scanners, and lo and behold, so does his charisma-free leading male woes end instantly with the next film, and I don't think he has that issue ever again. Coincidence? You decide. But we're not going to jump straight onto the next Cronenberg movie. We're going to take a slight detour, because along this crooked Cronenbergian path, there's an overgrown path that leads off the main thoroughfare, because unlike anything he'd previously presented us with, Scanner has more than a sniff of franchise potential about it. So we're going to wander off the beaten track and spend some more time for the next few videos in the company of Scanners, when I get a chance to, for the first time, watch and talk about the rather improbable Scanners 2, Scanners 3, and the fantastically titled Scanner Cop, and the almost inevitable Scanner Cop 2. So join me for lots of that.